this.
I'm Steve Schultz with the Corvallis Advocate. Voters will decide 3 proposed city charter amendments this November. Ballots are due on the 2nd. Mayor Biff Traber, what's the process been for arriving at these charter amendments in just a minute or two, and then we're going to go through each of the charter amendments?
Well, this started several years back with some counselors. I believe Penny York actually helped get it started at the time, but it was counselors raising the question of whether there's some updates in a variety of areas that there seemed to be interest in fixing or improving. There ended up being an ad hoc committee of counselors that began to go through this. I believe there was also citizen input at the time. Like I said, it's been going on for a number of years, probably longer than it should have, and got longer when COVID started. But as we went through that, we worked through and came down to a sense of where the current council had a common view of what the specifics of the changes would be, and then brought those forward in the more formal process of I'm trying to go adopting resolutions to put this on the ballot. And that's what you now see for the 3 topics.
Right. Okay. And let's go through those. And then there's a few things that didn't make it this time that were discussed in a couple of years ago, city council election debates, which we'll go through in a few minutes. First, though, let's go through measure 2-131. This one extends city manager recruiting periods. I'd heard some reporting on NPR that city managers are harder to find than they used to be for a number of reasons. Did that motivate some of this, and what are some of the specifics of the measure?
Well, basically the measure is designed to give an adequate amount of time in a transition period with a city manager pro tem to be able to recruit a new city manager. And what started it all was my first year as mayor. We were recruiting a city manager. We actually were in the middle of it. That had started fall of the year before. And it turned out there was a relatively short time period in the charter for how long a city manager pro tem could serve. And we had a great city manager pro tem in Nancy Brewer, the finance director, who knew the city well, knew how it worked, managed to very well keep operations going. However, we were running into the point of where towards the end of the city manager recruiting that resulted in hiring Mark Shepard as the city manager, which I believe was a great success. But as we were getting toward the end of that, we were running out of runway on the amount of time that Nancy Brewer could serve. And if we weren't able to make a decision among the candidates and et cetera, we would have to pause the city manager recruitment and go out and hire an interim city manager. And that would be something that would be costly, disruptive to the city. And so that led to discussions at the time. And in some sense, that may have been the genesis for, well, let's look more closely at other aspects of the charter as we recognize that as a definite problem. What you have in there now is, in concept, 2 pieces. One is that the staff recruiter needs to bring forward to council, and council approve very quickly a recruitment plan that lays out details of a particular recruitment for a particular time frame. However, it also sets the end time that it can be no longer than a city manager pro tem serve, no longer than 2 years. Now that is a way out there time frame, just to make sure that if there are hiccups in the recruitment, as you mentioned, it's hiring senior management in the city can be difficult. We've gone through a couple of re-recruitments for directors as the city of Corvallis, and that is the sort of thing that The charter now has a limit that we aren't likely to run into. The plan put together by council for each specific recruiting of city manager, that process can be shorter than that, but it does give the current council the opportunity to decide how to go about doing the recruiting for a new city manager.
So then there is measure 2-132. This would change how city council vacancies are filled.
That's correct.
What's motivating that change or proposed change? And what are some of the specifics?
Well, the specifics are we switch from having to either call a special election within a certain period of time or go to the next general election in that period. So right now,
Yeah, let me
the
clarify.
charter says that if a vacancy occurs, there is an election coming up that would be used to elect a new city councilor. In the interim, there is not a city councilor for that ward. And those periods can be long. For example, we are currently in a period of Ward 8 not having a city councilor. That started on June 1st, which would mean we basically go 6 months without a city councilor for Ward 8 at the shortest. And this has happened several times in the recent 5 to 10 years for a variety of reasons. People moving out of their ward, people having health issues. City Councilor Bill Glassmeyer was an example of that. And we've gone to do special elections, but it left a period, an extended period without representation. And as council looked at that, they felt that was not appropriate. And they looked around and saw that most cities in Oregon had some form of an interim appointment to a position. And that's what this charter amendment does, is put that in place, that for the remainder of a term of a city councilor, which currently is 2 years, that there would be an appointment made among those who applied, that city council would select one of those individuals to be the representative of a ward. So as you can see there, the period of this appointment is limited by the normal term of a city councilor. And thus you can more quickly, within a period of a couple of months, have a new representative for a ward rather than having to go an extended period.
Okay, yeah, and for viewers, I think that I had forgotten to mention that these vacancies have to do with terms where a councilor has left midway through the term. Yes, and I probably should have clarified that when I asked the question. I apologize.
Or I should have said it more clearly when I started.
We're both figuring it out. Let's see. Let's go to measure 2-133. This would modify gender-specific pronouns throughout the city charter. Is this as straightforward as it sounds?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially, it would remove them.
Yeah, it's recognizing places where one used either gender-specific pronouns or titles that reflected gender, and trying to bring this charter into a more current state of recognizing a variety of genders and gender identities, and the lack of necessity of having your charter specify he does that, for example.
Okay, and then in coming up with this, was there any controversy, disagreement about this one?
No, it was more the time to go through the detail and then go through it again to make sure there wasn't something missed, or some probably the more subtle ones are not so much the turning keys into some other this person or whatever, but turning other things that would imply a gender into it, like a policeman rather than a police officer. And I don't know whether that was an example in there, but it's that sort of finding those titles or descriptors that imply gender.
Just out of morbid curiosity, and I'm almost certain you don't know this, how many pages and/or word count to the city charter?
I don't know. It's not hugely long. I'm sometimes surprised compared to our Muni code, which has many chapters. So the charter is shorter, but I do not know how many words, how many
Neither do I.
pages. Though you can go find it on the city website.
Yeah. Okay. In prior city council election debates, there's been discussion of changing a few things. Council terms, somehow or another staggering terms, kind of like they do with the school board. And then pay for counselors. I believe the school board's 4 years with 2 year stagger. There's no pay at the school board. There's no pay for city councilors. I don't believe you were paid either.
No, actually, to correct you on that, I do get $100 a month stipend.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. And how many hours you putting in a week, Biff?
A few.
Yeah. Okay. So these things didn't make it into this set of measures. Let's kind of take them one by one. Changed council terms.
Well, that one is still under discussion. I think council terms and other things related to that, number of wards, for example, is a correlated item. There is interest in among some counselors in doing it. There just is not closure about what the solution would be. And the council term lengths, for example, had to do with, we've had a lot of turnover in the past 8 to 10 years in counselors, which has been good because we've gotten a lot more diverse counselor population. But it's also meant we've seen more often new counselors come on board, and it takes on the order of a year to be able to get comfortable with to learn all you need to learn and then get comfortable and be productive as a counselor. So with a 2-year term, that sort of raises a question of, if you're 2 years and then decide you're not going to run again, how productive have you been? And the question's been raised, should we do 4 years for the terms? You then talk about 4 years. That's a long interim without letting people vote on who are the counselors, or at least some of the parts of the city vote on it. So then that's looking at doing staggered terms, which, as you mentioned, the school district, but also many cities in Oregon do 4-year terms for counselors and staggered terms, staggered elections. So both of those were looked at, and it was one, it still hadn't reached a consensus or a solid, yes, we really want to do this in a particular fashion. So that is still kicking around. You do mention, and I'll jump into it without you asking again, you mentioned about compensation, and the city councilors don't get paid anything. But one of the things, as we've tried to get more diverse council participation, when you start talking about working adults being on city council with families and the like, it then becomes a question of, are the barriers too high without any economic support for covering costs of being a counselor, the time spent to be a counselor? That had come up as well, and that had 2 ramifications. One is that if you ended up paying, we have one of the 2 cities in Oregon that has 9 city councilors, and whatever you decide to pay city councilors, that's a multiplier. And is that something that you perhaps want to look at fewer city councilors? So that got folded into the discussion and made it more complex. However, on the compensation part of the investigation, as this working group was going through this ad hoc committee, was doing the digging in and realizing that the compensation is something that's not specified in the charter, instead is in an ordinance. And in fact, the mayor's stipend of $100 a month is in an ordinance from, I think, the last century. But it's recognizing that could be handled outside of a charter amendment. So that process actually has started, and we are in the middle of a process that City Council initiated, which is to use the citizen members of the Budget Commission, no counselors, the citizen members of the Budget Commission, to go off by themselves and take input from a variety of sources about the question of should there be compensation, and if so, how much should there be compensation for the mayor and city council. They are currently working on it. I believe right about now is the second meeting of this committee. Tentatively, there is a report to council with recommendation or recommendations coming in November. And then council will decide how it wants to go about deciding to accept and implement recommendations, change them or whatever, but that's still to be seen. I don't know where that's going. And you all can follow it in our city council meetings as it gets to November, or you can follow it right now by looking on the city website, looking at the calendar about the Budget Commission and councilor compensation.
To your knowledge, and I just don't know, to your knowledge, what other cities in Oregon pay counselors a salary? Or do you even know?
I do not know specific names. I know a very large number of them do. Now, when we're talking about salaries, we're talking about stipends like this, the mayor's 100. So they run often in the range of $200 to $250 a month to help cover the costs, whether they're daycare costs, travel costs, meal costs for the time counselors spend being city councilors. And so it's in that range. It's not a living wage. It's not a minimum wage payment, and it's generally a stipend. I don't know where the Budget Commission is going to come out, but as you look across the state, there are a large number of those. And off the top of my head, I don't remember which ones actually do provide those stipends.
So in essence, really an offset for the expense of being a counselor.
That's in part why it's referred to as a stipend. In my case, that's how the ordinance is written, is it's this $100 a month to offset the expenses that I have for being in office.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Traber. For our viewers, a reminder that ballots are due